Good morning and welcome to the Point. This morning we're happy to have with us Senator Dave Hildenbrand, a Republican from Kent County. Senator, thanks and welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
There's a lot to talk about. We're going to start with a supplemental spending bill. I was explaining part of this on the air a few nights ago, and I cautioned the audience, don't yawn and don't let your eyes glass over, because it's important, because it's their money to start with. But the supplemental spending bill that was passed out of the Senate, not this past week, but the week before, is really one-time money, some savings through agencies that didn't spend all their money, and you and the Senate came up with an idea to reallocate some of that money. I think he ended up with 32 votes, so it means you got all the Republicans plus some Democrats to go along with it. But the House has some different ideas, so we aren't there yet. But let's talk a little bit about it. One of the things that is in that spending was $100 million for potholes and snow removal, which was music to the ears of counties and municipalities who are running out of cash.
Yeah. Well, first let me just say a supplemental bill is basically our budget, our state budget is a working document. We're constantly moving and adjusting numbers. You know, our budget's about $50 billion, so as the year progresses and revenues change and priorities and needs and departments and agencies change, we're constantly kind of moving things around to make those adjustments. And now with the challenges that the winter brought, as you pointed out, our counties, our cities, and our villages are facing some serious financial challenges because of the winter that we're having and still are having. So we decided to put $100 million basically of general fund money through the what's called the Act 51 formula, or our transportation formula, to basically filter out through to our counties and cities and villages to help them just basically recover and pay for some of those additional costs of labor to remove all the snow, and obviously the salt expenses and other expenses that come with the kind of winter that we had.
The problems that you have with roads, we will talk about further, because it's not just about what's going to happen right now, but the long-term problems that the governor has talked about for a while. That's one issue. But when it got over to the House, they changed some of that funding formula around. They took out some funds for Medicaid reimbursement and tried to put that money towards other road projects. So for this supplemental spending bill, and again, as you point out, it is a working document, but this is not about next year's spending. This is not about the supposed $1 billion extra that we had heard about. This is just about this year's spending, and that's going to have to go to a conference committee, true?
It will go to a conference committee. I mean, there are just different priorities that members have. We have 110 House members, as you know, and 38 senators and a governor who all are part of the process. And there's a lot of needs out there, and so there's a lot of legislators with ideas. So we'll send it to a conference committee, which basically means there'll be 3 House members and 3 Senate members who will kind of come together to look at and sort out the main differences in the bill. And I'm pretty confident that we'll very quickly come to resolution. We need to have some answers soon, and I think in the next couple weeks we'll have that resolved.
I want to expand on what you said, because this was really the point of a story that I did Thursday of this past week, and we talked about that very thing, that once you go to a conference committee, it gets easier because you don't have the full committee, the appropriations committee, or the full House, because as you again point out, there are 148 members plus the governor. That means there are 149 priorities that have to be addressed on any spending bill. Now you're down to 6 people with an eye on what the governor will or won't approve. But the other part of that equation is that to get the votes in the House, 56 over there and at least 19 over in the Senate, you have to decide if you're going to try to go with Republican votes or try to entice Democrats along the way. And in this case, with pretty firm majorities in the House and the Senate, this is likely going to be one where they'll try to get Republicans on board.
I think so. I mean, I think there will be a lot of give and take, and ultimately I think the end product is going to be good. I don't think everybody's going to be totally happy with the end product, but there'll be some give and take, and I think ultimately it'll be a good product and will help, especially, there's a lot of pieces to the supplemental bill, but I think the key one is to help our local units of government who are really struggling with the costs that they've incurred over this very, very tough winter.
Now that's all happening while on a parallel course, appropriators are also looking at next year's budget, and that is the budget where there may be extra, and I use air quotes because there's never really extra money in government, but more money than the revenue estimators had come up with earlier, and a pretty sizable chunk of money, $1 billion by some estimates, that you guys will start working on appropriations for. As that process goes along, the governor talked about a priority of his in the form of tax relief, which was a priority of yours that you laid out to me 2 days before the governor even talked about it. You said you'd like to see something done about the homestead tax credit and be able to reinvest with people that way, because that had been cut back in the governor's first budget.
Right, yeah. Well, the process began about a month ago when the governor presented his budget to the legislature for next year, as you pointed out, the fiscal year that starts October 1st this fall. And it's a $52 billion budget. When I started in the House in 2005, almost 10 years ago, our state budget was $39 billion. So it has grown significantly over that time. Of course, time has gone on and needs grow, and so there's been some spending because of that. But our job is to be accountable for those tax dollars, and so I think we'll be working in the next several months to get a balanced state budget so our revenues equal our expenditures. We're going to hope to have that completed by the end of May or early June, and it'll be a comprehensive budget where I think we will invest in the priorities of the people of this state. Education is a priority. Fix our roads is a priority. Support our seniors and our veterans, our public safety. Those are key priorities that I think will be invested. And with the surplus that you had mentioned, we'll be able to do that. But I also think that we need to be respectful of the taxpayers who, because we have this surplus, they have overpaid government. And so, I've heard from some folks that have said, well, don't just nickel and dime some small little tax break to us, spend it in some areas. But I think we can do a comprehensive solution where we do invest, but also give some back to the taxpayers. My proposal is similar to the governor's, which would give about $100 to $200 million back to the taxpayers. It would be a targeted tax cut, targeted to the low to middle income families in the state who are homeowners. And I think that's important because for those of us who own homes, there are a lot of expenses, extra expenses that come with home ownership. And these middle to low income families, they don't have a lot of extra money, and they're paying property taxes, and they're paying for maintenance for their homes and a lot of additional family expenses. So I'm hopeful to get the support of my colleagues and the governor to move something like that forward, which would include rebate checks this current year and then sort of an ongoing tax credit for those taxpayers down the road who own homes in a certain income bracket.
We know that there is a constituency for every dollar that flows from state government. People say, oh, well, that's stupid spending when they talk about a particular issue. Well, it's only stupid if you're not getting the money. I mean, that's the fact of government, as is the fact we talked about before. There are at least 149 different priorities on how to spend from all of the different members. So now you're dealing with this big budget. And by the way, part of the growth of that budget from the time you've been in the House over to the Senate has been additional federal funds coming through, too, because federal spending has gone up. But with all of that being said, the budget process, when it's all said and done by the end of May, will still not include one of the governor's biggest priorities, and that's $1 billion extra a year for roads. That's just not going to happen, is it?
I don't think it'll happen this year. I do think we'll continue to invest some of the surplus and make roads and bridges and infrastructure in this state a spending priority in the budget. We were able to put $350 million additional dollars in the current budget for roads and bridges in this state. I think the governor's proposed additional money in the tune of about $280 million for next year's budget. So I think we'll continue to make investments in roads and bridges, but to ask the legislature for $1 billion extra in ongoing revenue for 10 to 12 years is going to be difficult to do at this time. But I do think we'll continue to make it a spending priority, and I think there will be improvements made in the infrastructure in this state in the years to come.
I talked with your colleague, Senator Stephen Bita. He is a Democrat from the east side of the state. He was on the show last week, and when I asked him about it, I said, and he appeared to be in favor of putting more money into roads, but of course where the rubber meets the road is where does that money come from? And I said, so is that a matter of new revenues? And obviously, some of your Democratic colleagues are very opposed to having anybody in the middle class, what they consider middle class taxpayers, pay more. So is it new tax revenues or is it savings? And he said if it happens, it would be a combination of the two. Do you agree with that assessment that if you come up with that, and as you point out, it's not going to happen in this budget cycle, And I would say it's not going to happen before this election cycle. But if that happens, will it be a combination of the two with both savings and revenue generation?
Yeah, not necessarily. I mean, I think that as our economy gets better and we get more revenue into state government, our job as a legislature and a governor is to prioritize that spending. You know, this is tax dollars that the taxpayers have sent to us to allocate to all the programs that are necessary to run a government of this state. And so if we continue to get the kind of surpluses that we're seeing, we can have the debate. Do we return it to the taxpayers, or if the needs are great, then we invest it in areas that are a priority for us and for our residents, which in this case seems to be investing in our roads. So not necessarily, I don't think there will be new spending or savings. It will maybe be part of a continuous surplus as the economy continues to get better.
But if there is a continuous surplus, just like we saw during the Engler years, there will be a huge hue and cry from some of your colleagues to say we need to cut income tax. In fact, we're already hearing that now, and there will be a proposal that will run through committee that will talk about reducing the overall income tax rate in the form of a rebate, which might then reduce that continuing surplus.
It may, and that's always part of the debate that we'll have. Some members really are pressuring to lower the income tax rate and lower our tax rates. Others want to spend that surplus in some of the priority areas. So we'll continue to have that debate. That's just a part of the process.
That's why it's fun to get up and go to work every day. And when we come back, we're going to talk about some other funding issues. School funding, the Senator mentioned just a moment ago. But what about personal property tax? Not your personal property tax, but personal property tax that some big manufacturers spend some big bucks on, and that I believe this senator might suggest is a job skiller. That plus a lot more coming up when we come back next. To the Point. Welcome back to the Point. Senator Dave Hildenbrand is my guest. He is a Republican from Kent County. Senator, let's talk about something that may create more animosity in Lansing than anything else, and that is education funding. There are two very different schools of thought on this. The governor says, look, I've put more money back into education. I've put money there and we're spending on it. Democrats say, oh no, you've taken money out of education. We're not spending as much. And by the way, they would say not spending enough. If you look at the numbers, you can make the case for both because money has been shifted over the course of time. General fund money had been put into education. Some of that has been backed back out from time to time. It started in the Granholm administration as well. And then there has been a shift for some of those K through 12 dollars that has gone to some higher education or community college. All of that sounds a little bit confusing. I'm not going to pretend that we're going to sort it all out here, but what's your take? Where should we be going with education?
Well, you're exactly right. There has been a lot of finger pointing, both from the education community to the legislature, between Republicans and Democrats about education funding. And let me just say that education funding has always been a priority in the legislature, and as long as I've been there. I mean, every year we will save, we'll cut other programs, but continue to invest in education. Now, over the years, I think I'm the kind of legislator I like to cut through the clutter, and I'll quickly try to explain that finger pointing that's going on. In 2009 and 2010, there was a federal stimulus money that the Congress and President Obama passed. And part of that was to divert money through the states to support education. So in that 2-year period, Michigan received over $1 billion in one-time money to support public education. So we as a state passed that through our state to the school districts across Michigan. Well, at that time we were very clear with our school districts that this is one-time money. Please don't build long-term programming because this potentially, most likely, wouldn't be a sustainable long-term funding source, but use it for one-time things, maybe capital, maybe put it in your savings account or rainy day fund or things like that, because it's not going to be an ongoing source of revenue. Well, that money went away after the stimulus went away, and so you could say, well, you cut $1 billion out of education, but the fact of the matter is it was the federal government who basically stopped that program, and the money then went away. So over the last 4 years, though, from a state, what we're responsible for from a state investment in public education, from 2011 through the proposed budget of next year, we have increased public education funding in the state by over $1 billion. So it continues to be a top priority for me as a senator, for the legislature and the governor, and I think it will continue to be. It's our second largest ticket item in the state budget, next to community health, and it's an important part of the state. We have a constitutional responsibility to provide a free public education to every young person in the state. We take that very seriously. I take that responsibility very seriously. But just as important as more money for education, we also need to focus on making sure that the system is accountable, that we're getting a good product for our young people, that they're learning, there's a good culture, a good environment for learning and education, and that our young people are being prepared for their futures. So it's a two-prong approach, good investment and accountability and responsibility as we look at public education.
I don't want to go too far down this path because we could spend the rest of the show talking about it, but I hear from time to time, and it always comes up around budget time, that the funding mechanism, not the allocation, but the funding mechanism, how we collect money for schools, might need to be looked at again, because we did the changes back in the 90s about how schools would be funded. There were some promises that haven't been realized. For example, schools are not equally funded across the state. That was one of the promises of Prop A that has not completely been fulfilled. Is it time to take a look at the funding mechanism for schools, K through 12 schools?
Yeah, we can always look at the funding mechanism. But to your point on the funding gap, we continue to close that gap. As we are increasing funding for public education, we are bringing up the lower funded school districts a little bit more than the upper funded school districts. So we are continuously and each year closing that gap, so every child in Michigan has the same amount of money following them to the school district. We're trying to close that gap, and I think we'll continue to. But there's no perfect funding mechanism system. You know, Proposal A and what you referenced in the 90s when we shifted from the property taxes more to a sales tax, you know, that was just a different way to fund public education in Michigan. And there are a lot of pros to that, but there are some downsides to it as well, because as the economy shifts and changes, your funding fluctuates greatly as well, and so then you have to make adjustments in those appropriations. So there's no perfect system, and I think we should always be continuously looking at it to see if there is a better way to do it.
By the way, when you talk about equalized payments, you just guaranteed I got 20 principals in West Michigan that are sending me emails right now. I'll share those with you later. Let's talk about something else that may be changing. The personal property tax. I know this has been a priority for the Senate particularly. Personal property tax, I'll explain it, then you tell me where I'm wrong. Personal property tax for businesses is on equipment that you buy and use, and there is a plan to phase that out. In fact, it's already begun for some small businesses, but as an example, I think if I had a construction company and I bought 2 new bulldozers, for example, I would pay sales tax on those. But then on a yearly and a decreasing rate, I would also pay a tax yearly, because that would be personal property for my business. And that, say, some of your colleagues, is an onerous tax that is not shared with other states in the upper Midwest, and thereby creates an unequal playing field for our businesses. Did I get close on that?
Yeah, you're exactly right. With the personal property tax, we're in the Midwest. There are a number of states that don't have a personal property tax. I explain it, and you did a very, very good job explaining it. You can also explain it if you take a business, basically, and take the roof off and tip it upside down and shake it. It's everything of value, equipment, computers, desks, chairs, everything that would sort of fall out of that building, that manufacturing site. There would be a value put on that, and then the millages would be applied to that, and that would be a tax for that business then to pay. The unique thing about the personal property tax is that it's authorized by the state through statute, but it's collected by our local units of government, and it's spent at the local unit of government level, and it's spent in schools locally, local units of government, other millages like libraries, jails, senior millages, all benefit from the personal property tax. So as we look to get rid of the personal property tax or phase it out so we can continue to make Michigan competitive in terms of attracting jobs and growing jobs here in the state, we have to also be sensitive to the revenue that's going to be lost at the local units of government. So we have basically a 10-bill package. I'm one of the legislative sponsors, and we're looking at phasing it out over time. But also a part of that is to put a question on the ballot in August to basically shore up the funding so there's no lost revenue for the local units of government. It wouldn't be a tax increase. We would basically be using another tax revenue source, the use tax in Michigan, to basically reimburse the lost revenue to the local units of government. So we're basically getting rid of a tax that's making us less competitive and replacing that lost revenue with existing revenue that we already have in state government.
So if I am a taxpayer, my question is to you, okay, fine, I'm all about getting rid of the tax on personal property, and fine, the use tax can be used to make local communities whole, but where's the whole? Because the use tax is being used for something else now, so what doesn't get funded if counties and municipalities get fully funded?
That's a great question. We have tax credits as part of the old Michigan business tax that will be expiring. These are hundreds of millions of dollars that were built into the budget for tax credits that would give for large employers if they have promised to bring in a number of jobs into the state or grow their business. Well, those tax credits are going away, and we have basically that money becomes available then to shore up the use tax, the loss in the use tax. So it's all going to neutralize itself out. Nobody's going to see a tax increase, and it's going to create a better business environment for more and better jobs in the state.
Public vote comes up in August. That'll be the primary. There'll be a lot of other things on there, and it's going to be a tough vote to message for folks because the vast majority of us don't pay that personal property tax as a business. So what do you have to do? I know business leaders are on board, municipalities are on board, so are they going to have to carry the messaging on that to make sure people understand what that is?
We have a great coalition. We just had a press conference last week. This is supported by Republicans, Democrats, business, school groups. Everybody is on board. Everybody is in favor of getting rid of the personal property tax because we know how it puts us at a competitive disadvantage in the state. But the concern was always, how do we make up that lost revenue? And this solution brought everybody to the table. And I think as we go around in communities and neighborhoods this summer and talk about it, I think we'll get a lot of support from the voters.
All right, we've got a short period of time, and I hate to do this to you because here is a big subject that we are not even going to get close to covering, but we just did a series of reports in the past couple of weeks about the auto no-fault reform. It is something that we have heard about. Well, I should go back and say that I started covering the legislature in 1995, 1996, in that neighborhood. People were talking about auto no-fault then. The conversation has continued, though not much has happened. I know the governor has said he is interested in looking at this. There has been more and more talk. There have been proposals. There's a new proposal that they're working on. I know it's really been more of a House initiative. But is this something that is coming closer to fruition, or is this going to be another year of a lot of conversation, a lot of dust, and when it settles, it's going to look just like it did when we started the year?
It's a difficult issue, I'll tell you. We've been looking at this for years. You know, the auto no-fault law in Michigan was enacted back in the 70s. And our insurance rates, without question, our auto insurance rates are higher than almost any other state in the country. And the reason for that is because we have the most generous of benefits. And so if you're going to have the most generous of benefits, if somebody in Michigan is involved in an auto accident and are catastrophically injured, they are guaranteed health care and benefits for life. It's an expensive system, but you will be taken good care of if you're injured in an auto accident.
I got about 15 seconds left. Are we going to see legislative action on this?
We'll have public hearings on it. I don't know if we'll ever resolve anything, but there is some changes that can be made to make the system run better and to hopefully lower costs in our auto insurance rates.
And with that, I will invite you back to explain those changes at a different date. We'll be back with more To the Point in just a moment. Thanks to Senator Hildenbrand for being our guest this morning. It's going to be a very busy legislative year. There's no question about that, particularly when it pertains to the budget. But by the way, it is an election year, and next week, one of those folks who wants to run for a big office, To the Point.